I'm Joel Arnold with Foundation Baptist College, and this is a continuation of the class Elementary Greek, coming today to chapter 14, which is third declension nouns. Okay, so for context, what we had done in our lead up to now was recognizing kind of a series of lessons where there are these somewhat exceptional things we need to work with. So we worked through chapter 12, second aorist indicatives, chapter 13, liquid verbs. We acknowledged that in each of those cases, there are little changes or adjustments we have to make to the basic forms that we learned earlier. And that continues now with 14 in the third declension nouns. Third declension is just a way of saying that there is pattern or system number 3. We've already worked through first and second declensions, and just for a real quick review of what we did there, first declensions, or the feminines, were this pattern, aes, aen, ion, is, os. Occasionally you have this situation where you're using instead the alpha pattern, and so you might do a, os, a, an, ion, is, os. But when those are applied, we put those on the noun agape, and we end up with agape, agapes, agape, agapein. That's all first declension, or it's just another maybe fancier way of saying pattern number 1. Pattern number 2 that we learned was with the masculine endings, and it's similar enough that we end up saying the same pattern, or labeling the same pattern for the neuter endings. So under masculine, os, u, o, on, oi, un, ois, us, expressed in the neuter, on, u, o, on, a, on, ois, a. Very similar related forms, and when they're applied to nouns, then we get logos, lagu, lago, lagon, lagoi, lagun, lagois, lagus, and so forth. Okay, so those are the patterns that we learned to this point. First declension feminines, masculines and neuters, second declension. And when we shift now to third declension, we're acknowledging that there are nouns, and actually a fair number of them, that don't follow those patterns we've learned. If you've been working through, starting to do some early translation, you may have encountered some of these nouns, and they may have been a little mystifying to you. And that is because you're looking at a different set. Now, here's one of the challenges with these nouns. These do not all follow as rigorously the pattern that you've seen with previous nouns. So if you've gotten used to, I guess, more or less the luxury of taking logos and just putting os, u, on, oi, oisus, just putting it on the end and everything stays out in a very consistent manner. Well, third declension's a little fuzzier, and you have to then have a bit more toleration for the unexpected. You already have a hint of this when you start looking at your forms, when you started learning your vocab forms for this lesson. And that was, if you looked at your vocab forms in the vocab list, you might have seen something different. Okay, instead of ha, logos, he, agape, ta, teknon, you actually had a listing that went something like this. Let's start at the top. Ta, onoma, onomatos. And so why 2 forms? If I move down ha, aner, andros, he, gune, gunaikos, why 2 forms? That's because the third declension forms do change between that top leftmost form, that really critical form that you've learned, where you learn like logos. They will actually change as they move down the rest of the chart. And let me show you what that looks like in terms first of the endings that you need to learn, and then let's practice a little bit how that would be applied to individual nouns as we work through them. So starting first with the endings, here are your masculine and feminine endings. You'll need to memorize this chart cold in the same way that you've worked in the past with the previous noun charts. You just need to know it. And the starting point that you'll get is just a detail. Notice here at the top, I put a star. Now, there are other ways that you could express this. This is not infrequently going to be a sigma, so that could be an ending, especially that tends to go in the feminine side of things. But, you know, it's inconsistent enough that I'll put a wild card there. And so when I memorized this, I actually did memorize blank, ossia, essensios. And I use my method, the way I memorize these to get them so they'll stick with me, is I just say them 1,000 times, walking down a sidewalk, out loud, driving somewhere out loud over and over. Just keep on saying it until it gets solidly in your mind. So you could do exactly that here, but you want to keep that topmost spot, as I said it, a blank. And following down, you will also see a little bit of variation that can happen here, particularly again in the feminine. I might have the neuter or the new, but that can depend. It just depends on the specific noun that we're looking at. So as I said, you are just learning to be functionally aware of the general pattern, and then applied to different nouns, it can come out a bit differently. And what that expresses, if you recall let's just recall first what I put up here a moment ago. If I have some of these nouns, such as the noun sarx, the way that you learned this in your vocabulary form, you were given, hey, sarx, sarkos. And that is to say, when I go to apply these forms, these endings, here I'll put the endings up here together with you. The very first spot could be exceptional. It's a wild card. And so you have to know it from the vocab. The vocab form of that is sarx. Subsequently, you can see I'm applying os, ea, es, and sios. This noun is thankfully really pretty consistent. So once I get started applying, then okay, I'll be fine. But starting off, that first spot will be potentially an exception. Similarly, if I give you a masculine example, the way this form was written in your vocab was archon, archontos. Okay, well, your first form is the archon. And then in order to know how to do the second spot, the genitive spot, you do need to know the next part of the vocab. So I would strongly encourage you to learn these vocab forms, not just learning the initial word, but you need to learn archon, archontos, because the archontos is going to be your key applying here. And subsequently, you can just apply the endings, os, e, a, es, and sios, etc. Okay, so that would be the pattern for both masculine and feminine. If you recall, the first declension was just feminine, second declension was just masculine, or was masculine and neuter. In this case, we have two different patterns under the third declension. And the first of those patterns is the third declension masculine / feminine. Which brings me then, if I continue on, let's go over to the neuter endings. They'll be better if we compare the neuter endings side by side. So the forms that we just worked on here, and then the neuter endings that we're adding here. Notice the pattern. I've got os, blank, os, e, blank, a, on, si, a. Okay, now it is a different pattern, and you need to learn it or know it as a different pattern. But it will help you, at least, I think, for starters, it will help you to recognize that I've got this row right here and this row, these two middle rows, they're identical. And that actually fits exactly the pattern we picked up earlier when we worked on the first and second declension. When we got to the neuter forms were identical to the masculine in that center section. If you remember another pattern with the neuter forms previously, the top row and the bottom row were identical. Okay, so when we learned those endings before, we learned on, u, o, on, oi, on, u, o, on, a, on, ois, a. Might as well look at it over here. And we recognize that these forms are going to be identical to these forms. They match up. The center row, these other four right here, are identical to the masculine. Okay, well, when I get over here, good news, I discover the same. I discover that the top row, the nominatives, are identical to the bottom row, the accusatives. And so actually it turns out you don't have a lot of extra memory work. If you could remember what I just said about the middle rows being identical, then you're just done with all of this. And if you remember the way that the top matches the bottom, you would be already finished with this. Actually, the only thing you would need to remember would be the neuter plurals, nominative and accusative. But otherwise, that's a pretty easy chart to derive. And if you look down how that looks in the expression within individual nouns, let's just see how this is applied. When you learn the word pneuma, which means spirit, as in Holy Spirit, it will be given to you in vocab as pneuma, pneumatos. Okay, you need to learn both parts. But this pattern is not, it's not unusual with the neuters. A lot of them do this kind of matas, or they'll start off with the mu alpha. Plummer observes that anytime a noun ends in mu alpha, it's a third declension, or it's always a neuter. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of a pattern. There's a bit of a morphological pattern. And how this expresses then is that what goes here automatically goes here. I fill in my other forms, os e, numata. This matches the pattern, the chart above perfectly, and what goes there also goes down here. And I fill in my forms in between. Okay, so actually it's not a terribly hard chart to apply now that you know a little bit about how this works and you've gotten used to applying these charts. If I give you one other example, this will be a little bit different. In this case, what seems to be going on is possibly morphologically, and this is kind of theoretical really, but you've got, it seems, in all of these spots, gen, and then an implied epsilon. However that's working itself out, the epsilon implied there is matching with the os e in order to give me us a. Over here I've got the circumflex that represents it. I've got that epsilon actually explicitly right there. So it's kind of like a contract vowel. And you can look at that and find that, I guess it's possible to find that frustrating and confusing. But what I said earlier, keep that in mind. The third declensions don't require you to memorize these. I'm not going to give you on a quiz or a test the requirement to write out all the forms. You don't need to write out genos or genos from top to bottom in all the forms. You need to be able to recognize them. And so long as recognition happens, you'll be okay. Okay, so familiarity with the charts and the systems and the combinations will be sufficient. If I put that down here, there is one other pattern I need to recognize that's consistent across the entire scheme. And that is at these spots. Pay attention to the dative plural. Each one of the dative plural spots, the conflict that's going to happen here is that I'm combining the stem, whatever it is. Well, we can take sarx. And if my stem then is sarc, when sarc, or when the kappa, goes up against the sigma, I'll end up with sarc c. And that conflict, or that clash in the consonantal structure, the kappa plus the c, or the sigma, we've seen before that kind of thing, it's grating. Something doesn't work there. There's some kind of conflict or clash. So what will help you in managing that is actually something, believe it or not, that you picked up way back when you were working on the futures. And underneath the futures, we saw this. Plummer refers to it as the square of stops, which is helpful. But we just recognize what we're paying attention to here really is the top three. Okay, you don't need to worry about this for now. But under the top three, we saw the pattern that if I have my dentals, tau, delta, theta, zeta, plus a sigma, I'm just going to end up with sigma. Okay, these three, the palatals plus sigma, will give me c. And these, the labials, p, lips, pa, ba, fa, plus sigma will give me psi. Okay, well, the encouraging news is that when you go to the third declension, underneath the third declension, that's the exact same pattern. It's because there's something deeper going on here morphologically. You'll get the same pattern in how the sigma in each one of these spots will combine with the previous consonant. So here, sarc, this would be my combination right here, right? The kappa plus sigma. What that's going to turn into in the dative plural, sarc, sigma, sarc-c. Similarly down here, archon-tone. What I'm getting down here in this case is, well, I think the way to view this is I've got a nu tau plus a sigma. This doesn't fit the chart that you just saw, but the tau drops out, the nu plus sigma are going to leave us in this situation where I've got like a contract combination, and it's going to be epsilon plus omicron. Okay, the nu, believe it or not, is functionally kind of turning into like an epsilon. And I'm getting the u, arcusi. You've actually seen some of that before in other places. It's an odd exception, but we picked it up in other spots. And so that phenomenon is actually what's driving this change there. If I go over here, I'll get similar things. I told you that the epsilon is, there's like a theoretical epsilon in there. That epsilon is represented there. If I go up here, if my ending was pneumat, and I have then pneumat c, tau plus sigma, those two combined would leave me with just sigma pneumat c. Okay, again, I hasten to remind you that in none of these cases would I expect you to be able to reproduce what I just showed you. So I wouldn't expect you to just know what that dative plural is. You don't need to produce Greek. You need to be able to recognize Greek. And so my simpler suggestion for how to handle that dative plural, go in there, and if you see this, a sigma base underneath, I mean, that's kind of your key. You're looking for a sigma plus a iota. And the sigma in this express is in the C. Down here, there's the sigma expressed next to the iota. Okay, I've got my sigma iota. Even down here, I still have my sigma iota expressed there together. And here, in each of these cases, I can find the sigma iota. If you see a sigma iota at the end of a noun, then high likelihood you're looking at a dative plural. Okay, and that would be the thing that you would watch for. One other hint I would give you for the third declension is something I've hammered in here and there a couple of different times. And that is the reminder, the article is your friend. The article never lies. That little aphorism, learn it, memorize it, hang on to it, don't forget it. Very helpful. The article is my friend, the article never lies, helps me to, when I'm stuck in one of these sections or I'm seeing an odd form that doesn't make sense, look for the article as your guide. I may not be sure about the ending, but where the parsing or figuring out what the noun is, and I'm confused, if I've got an article, I won't always, but if I've got an article in the near context, it's a huge help. Saves me a lot of trouble. Because, and here's your key for the third declension, the articles that I use for the third declension are, good news, identical to the first declension and second declension articles. Okay, so if you recall the way these were, here's what we gave as what we learned as the feminine, masculine, and neuter articles. So hey, taste, tatain, haitun, taistas, etc. Okay, those articles, same articles with the third declension. There is no special third declension article. An article is an article. The article is your friend. The article never lies. As you're working through a form, if you get confused or you're having trouble parsing what a particular noun is, if you've got an article, it'll save a lot of trouble for you. I'm going to close out this lesson by getting the opportunity to look at a particular passage where we have a high density of third declension nouns. And it does turn out that a number of the really rich soteriological nouns are third declension. There's no grammatical reason for that. It's just what happened. But here's a beautiful passage in Romans 8. Let's look at it together and just, I hope, have some appreciation and enjoyment of looking through it together. So Paul comments here, so then, brothers, I'm moving across here. So then, brothers, we are obligated. We are obligated, this is the form of esmen, of amy, and it's just a present active indicative, first person plural. We are obligated not to the flesh, according to the flesh, to live. This is actually an infinitive. We've not learned it yet. But you can see right here, here's a preposition and followed immediately after by sarx. This is a feminine singular accusative. And, you may look at it, not be able to recognize it, but look at the ending, os e a. Okay, that works. Not to the flesh, right here, I should have done this as well. This is a dative, sarki, os e. This one is a little easier because article is my friend. Not to the flesh, according to the flesh to live. For if, according to the flesh, you should be living, or you are living, this is a present active indicative, second person plural. We are about, or you are about to die. Okay, this is an infinitive. We haven't learned it yet. But here I can work out what is sarka because we've already done it. This is a feminine singular accusative. But if by the Spirit, the deeds of the body you are putting to death, you will live. Okay, break down the grammar on that really quickly. This is a condition. If by the Spirit, I translated it that way. It is a dative. And so if you did something like 2 or 4, well, okay, you're translating it or you're following the rules correctly. We will learn as we keep on working that datives have a range. And so this is an instrumental dative, and it does have that meaning by. The ESV has rendered this accurately. But as I look at it then, if I'm trying to figure out what the ending is or what the case is, there's my key. I look at the iota. The nominative form is pneuma, the genitive pneumatos, so os e. And this is a neuter, which you can't know exactly here because you don't see the article, though we'll see an article later down in the passage. Okay, so if by the Spirit, the deeds of the flesh or the actions of the flesh, so it turns out actually this is also a third declension noun, and this is a feminine plural accusative. You could be helped there because the article is your friend, tos, and so it makes sense as a feminine plural accusative, high, tone, tais, tos. So the actions of the body you are putting to death. Here, this is also a third declension noun. This is also neuter. The article is your friend. It'll help you immediately recognize neuter singular genitive, the actions of the body. You will live, this is a future, so from zao, and then I've got my sigma in here, second person plural. For as many as, this is a little bit of a more complex pronoun, but you can see it looks a little bit like a relative pronoun, so whichever kind of sense, but as many as, it's the more obvious English way to translate it. For as many as by the Spirit of God are being led. The neuter here, or excuse me, the third declension noun here, dative, neuter, dative, singular. And I can see it by my ending, which I've already worked at one of those. We had one of those. The Spirit of God, they are being led. For as many as are being led by the Spirit of God. These is a demonstrative pronoun. I believe we have learned these. These are, there's our me form, third person plural, sons of God, plural, masculine nominative singular, masculine nominative plural, sons of God, masculine singular genitive. For you did not receive. This right here is a second aorist. Remember, elabon is the form to learn there. And so second aorist, second person plural. For as many as are, for you have received, or for you have not received, the spirit or a spirit of slavery. Okay, there's a feminine singular or neuter singular accusative, and this is the direct object. That's why it's accusative. You did not receive what? The spirit of slavery, again, unto fear or into fear, bringing you to fear. But you received a spirit of sonship. Okay, this is a challenging one, but that ending right there, S-E-A-S, the reason it's alpha is because I've got a iota right before. Remember the epsilon iota or rho, I said ear is my way of remembering it, drives an alpha pattern. So that's what's driving there. And then feminine singular genitive. So if your chart was ace, ain, ace has changed to as, hui thesias, a spirit of adoption, by which or in which we are crying out, Abba, Father. This is actually really beautiful. This is an Aramaic word, and it only occurs, to my memory here, I think it does occur in Galatians and then at Gethsemane. Jesus cries this out. And so Paul's really making a bit of a reminder of the richness of that part of the story. Jesus cried out to his Father, so can we. This is also a third declension noun. In this case, interesting, it looks like a nominative, and if you parsed it that way or declined it that way, then, well, you're in a fair spot. I'm seeing that article, and so it does lead me towards nominative. But you just have to know your grammar, in which we are crying out. What are we crying out? Abba, Father. And it's because we're addressing him. Like you can imagine, you're looking at him, Abba, Father. Well, that's vocative. And the vocative form is going to be identical to the nominative here. So if you say nominative, you're on the right track. But just technically, it's a vocative because it's speaking to the Father. The Spirit himself, we've worked on this when we study the personal pronouns. We talked about intensive pronouns. And with particular configurations, then that's the meaning. The Spirit himself is testifying with this martyreo, as in martyr. You've heard that kind of thing. Testifying. The sum on the front of it is soon added to it. Testifying with. And it's a third person singular present active indicative. So the same Spirit, or the Spirit himself, is testifying. This is the subject, is testifying. Again, I'm going to render this with the Spirit of us, or with our spirit. This is not a hard one to parse because I've got an article on the front of it. Article is your friend. And so I'm looking at a neuter singular dative. With our spirit, that we are, there's our form of a me, children of God. And so the subject of this is the we itself. It's implied in the verb and the direct object, children of God. Okay, that was a bit of a longer-ish passage and maybe a little bit of challenge mentally to follow through all of that. The point of that, if we just back up a little bit again, take another look at all the red, just pay attention to the red on here. I've got a lot of nouns here that are third declension. And I think the point just stands. You have to be prepared to work with the third declension. You're going to have a lot of keywords all across. In fact, I've not even covered them all here. Some of them could be highlighted. We saw several other soma, somatos, the word for body, several, the Father, several other words in this passage that are third declensions. So it's a regular recurring thing. Knowing your third declension nouns, knowing how to read them well, it's a little overwhelming at the beginning. I very much remember feeling some overwhelm. How am I going to be able to keep track of these when they're inconsistent? But as you work with them, eventually they do become natural, and you will be able to read down through the passage. So work towards that end. You just need to recognize them. You don't need to predict all the forms or all the ways that the nouns will change across their declension. You need to be able to recognize. And then once you can recognize, eventually this becomes fluid enough that you just read down through those passages and see them for the case they are. Great work with this lesson. This closes out the last of the 3 semi-exceptional lessons. And in the next lesson, we'll add our final verb tense, which is the perfect tense.